Welcome to Cafecitos. This is Coffee and Conversation with Stephanie Carrow. She is a psychotherapist and a life coach, which is super awesome. And we are so thrilled to have her with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Stephanie. She's from her office in Norwalk, and she also has a second office in New York City in Manhattan. She specializes in working with companies as well as individuals and couples. So she has a wide array of experience, and I thought it was super important to have her with us just to kind of see how we all deal with the current pandemic that's going on around us, and how we can get some tips on how to perhaps improve our mental health. So thank you, Stephanie, for being with us today. And tell us, if you would, Stephanie, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into psychotherapy.
Sure, and thank you for having me for this. My background, I started out in life actually going to school for a writing, as an English major with a concentration in writing, and I still write. I've always written, but after I graduated from college, I was looking around for some kind of meaningful day job because I figured I'm not going to, very few people actually make a living as a writer. And one thing kind of led to another, and somebody I knew who was in graduate school for social work thought that I would be a good fit for that and suggested that I audit some classes, and I did audit a class at Hunter College, a very unusual class called Social Work and the Arts, which was a perfect fit for me because of my writing background. And being in that class, I also realized that I'd actually always been a social worker all my life. I was, in my family, I was always analyzing everybody and everyone I knew I was analyzing. So it was a really good fit. And I took audited another class on policy. And I just decided that that was really the path that I wanted to go. So I applied, and I actually went part-time to Fordham University because I had to work full-time, and it was the only part-time program in the city, and I really loved it there. And when I graduated, I worked in a variety of different kinds of agencies. I worked even before I graduated, I started working in a hospital, and then I worked in programs for emotionally disturbed children and emotionally disturbed adolescents, and I worked in an outpatient alcohol rehab program. And I finally decided to move towards going into private practice because I felt that that's really where I was going to be of the most use. I didn't really want to do case management so much as I wanted to really help people understand themselves better and improve their own lives. And the last position I got while I was also building up my practice, and I was working in mental health clinics, and then I also got a position working at an employee assistance program at Con Edison in New York City, where I was for 11 years. While I was building up my practice, and I really, I just loved it there. I just thought it was a great program. And there are people there who are working with high voltage and gas and steam, and they get stressed out very easily, understandably. And it's really important for us to be there to help them to manage their stress and their other very strong issues that come up, so that they can do their work and do it safely for themselves and the community. So, after 11 years, I was ready really to go off completely on my own. And so that's what I did. And then I moved to Connecticut, and I started a second practice up in Connecticut. So I've been a clinical social worker for about 30 years, and I've been in private practice for about 25 of those years.
Wow, that's an extremely long time. Yeah. So that's wonderful. And now what do you like specifically? Do you like kind of dealing with folks more on that business side, where they're kind of having some conflicts with people at work, or do you have a preference at all? Or
I like them both, and the thing is that even when people are having conflicts at work, that either can affect their there are situations at home, or those conflicts at work are compounded by situations that are already going on at home. And there also can be background to kind of stuff, like if somebody, let's say, grew up in a very authoritarian family, and then they get a boss who's very authoritarian, that can raise all sorts of old issues for them that may never have been resolved. And if they can resolve those old issues, they can work better currently with that difficult boss or difficult coworker or difficult employee or whatever it might be. So it all kind of intermeshes together.
For sure. So, I mean, so those issues that they would have at home, kind of spill into work, or conversely the other way around. I mean, I read on your website that you were talking about kind of the conscious versus subconscious mind. And that really intrigued me because it was, kind of talking, almost like what you believe or what you internalize may kind of spill into, perhaps your actions, and may spill into your results. Well, it'll definitely affect the results. So is that something that you kind of dive deep into when you speak with a client?
For me, it's preferable to do that deep diving because it's really about self-knowledge. And the more a person knows him or herself, the more control they're going to have over their own lives. There might be people who sometimes think, why does this keep happening to me? There's a pattern in their lives, whether it's in relationships, they choose a certain kind of person to be with, whether it's romantic or friendship or whatever, or they keep losing a job for some reason or whatever, or there's some kind of pattern, things happen to them, and they might not realize that there are things that they are doing that are leading those things to happen to them. So the more we know ourselves, the better we can control whatever we're doing that is working not in our favor, so that we can lead happier and more productive and healthier lives. So I like to do those deep dives. Not everybody likes to do that. So I work, accordingly, but the more, as I say, the more a person knows him or herself, the better off they are.
So you kind of tailor your approach to what the client is a little bit more receptive to?
Absolutely, yeah. It's not one size fits all at all. Okay. Yeah.
So if you have someone who's a little bit challenged with that ability to open up to you, or where perhaps, I don't want you to give away the secret sauce, but what are some other things that you can do to kind of help them self-realize or self-discover, some of those patterns?
Yeah, and of course we never try to force anybody to do anything or to say anything they don't feel ready for. So it's really, that's part of what it takes time with this process, is that a person needs to feel comfortable, they need to feel safe, to say what they want to, what they feel they need to say. And it can take some people, like right off the bat, will tell you the story of their lives, but other people, it takes more time. And the most important thing we have to do is just to respect that time and take things at their own pace. So wherever the client is in the moment, I'm with them in that place. And I might try at times when I feel they're ready to kind of like nudge them along ever so slightly into like moving on to the next level, but it's never a big push. It's always just like a tiny little nudge. And if they're not ready to go there, then that's fine. And I respect that.
Okay. Well, is there anything or specific, without, I guess, getting into too many specifics, but is there a client that that comes to mind that you helped through a challenge that you were kind of happy to see that they kind of keep, we're down here, down in the dumps or something, and then improved to a certain level where they now are thriving and they're happy?
I have so many examples that I could give of that. It just would. I can give general examples of people who, as I say, they might be in somewhat toxic or abusive relationships. And at first, and they'll tell me the history of their relationships. And I will suggest to them that there seems to be a pattern of their picking people who are in some way not healthy for them. And they might say, oh, but all the people, all my boyfriends or girlfriends have been different. This one was a doctor, this one was a lawyer, this one cheated on me but didn't steal from me, this one stole from me but didn't cheat on me, this one started to get physically abusive but didn't cheat on me or steal from me. But I'll say, but notice how they've all been victimizing you in some way. The bigger pattern is that they've been victimizing you.
Sure.
And let's try to understand why you're, and they'll say, but they were so nice in the beginning, or they had a great sense of humor or whatever, which may all be true, but I'll want them to see, is there something in you that is gravitating towards someone who would victimize you? And invariably, they've grown up in homes where they've been victimized. So, and they kind of know that, but kind of aren't sure. Because when kids grow up in a certain kind of family, they don't know that other families are not like that. They just figure that's the way you grow up and that's the way, you're treated, whatever. So the more they understand whatever victimization they might have experienced in their childhood, whether it was in the home or outside of the home, whatever it was, the more they realize that they kind of get programmed to expect that for themselves, that they might think, that's all I deserve, I don't deserve any better, or that's all there is out there, there isn't anything better, or whatever. It's a kind of a programming that we grow up. We all our brains get programmed from birth on. And no more so than in the first year of life, and then in the first 3 years, the first 2 years after that. So the first 3 years of life are the most programming, and actually our brain changes more in our first year of life than it does if we live to be 100 in the remaining 99 years all told.
Wow.
There's so much changing, and our brain is constantly being programmed and reprogrammed, and can always be reprogrammed through life. But so if you grow up in a certain environment, your brain gets programmed to expect that and to gravitate towards that, and to that even as love. Oh, that's what relationships are. People fight all the time. That's what relationships are. People hit each other. That's what love is. And it takes time for them to realize, no, that's not true of relationships. That's not true of love. It's just true of what your experience was. And the more that they begin to realize that, the healthier and stronger they become, and the more able they are to leave those unhealthy relationships and find somebody who, and first and foremost, to begin to respect themselves and expect better for themselves and do better by themselves. And then little by little, they're also able to gravitate towards somebody who treats them better.
Wow. So it's really kind of understanding perhaps your childhood, understanding, what programmed your mind, your conscious or subconscious, and then once you understand that's, those patterns existed when you were younger, you can almost break the mold, so to speak, right? You can begin to kind of build a different understanding and a different programming.
Right. But it's slow, but it's incremental. One thing builds on another, but it's not the way you see in Hollywood movies where someone has a revelation and
Right.
the whole world changes. It would be wonderful if it worked that way, but unfortunately it doesn't. But, I can give you an example of somebody who, when she first came to see me, she was happily married, a young woman, very happily married, but she told me that sort of by chance one day, she just happened to mention to me that she didn't ever want to be a mother, which really surprised me because I thought she would make a wonderful mother. And then she began to reveal what it was like for her growing up, and she was concerned that she would never be able to be a good mother because of her experiences. And we worked a lot of that through, and while she was in treatment with me, she decided to become pregnant, and she had a beautiful little baby, and she was very happy. So, that's one very concrete example of, the kinds of things that we.
Sure. Well, that's phenomenal that you were able to get her to work through that, and and probably her self-realization that she, she gave it so much thought, she worked through it with you, and she's probably an excellent mother as a result, right? Because she's more aware, right?
Much more aware, yes. And she knows that if she ever needs to, she can always go back if she needs, some more help. But yes.
So tell me, Stephanie, with all that's going on around us with regard to COVID and the pandemic, what have you been seeing in terms of stress, anxiety, I'm sure people are, as they're in isolation, their stress and anxiety are kind of settling in, and
Yeah.
how they work on that.
Uh, a variety of ways, again, depending upon what they're dealing with. So, for example, I have two artists in my practice, two commercial artists, one of whom is a freelancer and one of whom is on staff somewhere, and they're both concerned about work. Just kind of, one is concerned that her freelance work is going to go down, and the other is concerned that her company might not last. And so with both of them, I've been working on, what happens when we're under stress is that we start into this very black and white. It's fight, flight, or freeze. There's no other choices. And and so it's very hard for us to think in terms of options. It's very hard for us to think beyond plan A. So what I've been working with them both on is it's helping them to dismantle that initial stress response, that fight, flight, or freeze response, so that then we can start talking about options, other areas of freelance work that they can get, other things open to artists, which are, if you could think clearly, like I'm not in their shoes, so if I can think clearly, I can think about all sorts of avenues they can. But when you're under a lot of stress, it's very hard to think about that. So
Okay.
the first step is to help them to manage their stress. So then thinking about other options. So those are two examples. I have been working with somebody who's naturally very hypochondriacal, and now with the COVID thing, it's even worse. So one of the things that I'm working with her on is sort of reality testing. Like, she always imagines the very worst, but every time she imagines that something that she's gotten contaminated in some way, we look, we look at it and we realize that that's not the case at all, and that she's fine and that she's healthy. So just sort of helping her to reality test as we go along, so that she doesn't let the worry overtake her. So that's another example. I'm just trying to think if there are any more. I mean, there are so many that come to mind, but of course people, oh, here's another example. I have a patient, a young patient, who was very concerned about her parents, especially her father, who she felt was not taking the proper precautions against COVID. He kept going into his office when there were still a few other people there, and not wearing a mask, and not doing real social distancing, and not taking it seriously. And she was telling him things like, "You've got to do this, and you've got to do that, and you can't do this," and it just wasn't getting anywhere with him. Um, and that's not unusual, because adult parents have a hard time taking orders from their adult children.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
so what I suggested to her was, instead of telling him what he can and cannot, or must not do, why not let him know, because he's very concerned about how she's doing, why not let him know about the anxiety it's causing her to think about him putting himself at risk. So she did that. The next time he called and he said, "Honey, how are you doing?" She said, "Well, I'm physically well, but I'm under tremendous anxiety because of what you're doing. I feel you're putting yourself at risk, and it's making me worry to the point of that I can't work and I can't sleep," and so forth and so on. She really laid it out to him. And when he heard that, he said, "Okay, from now on, I'm going to take the precautions." And from what she's getting reports from her mother, he is taking all the precautions. So it's really a matter of letting somebody know how their behavior is making you feel, or is impacting you in some way. And so that was a really good resolution to that.
That's amazing how she was able to kind of take his worry or concern for her and kind of say, well, you're you're not taking it seriously enough. Is causing you much more anxiety, much more stress, much more, yeah, and I could get ill.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and then in turn, his care and concern for her drove him to make better decisions about social distancing, and
Yes.
so that's a phenomenal story. Where,
And I
where
think it's something that can be employed all across the board, because when you tell people who care about you how their behavior is affecting you, that is more effective at getting someone to change a particular behavior than just telling them you can't do this or you mustn't do that or whatever. Or you
that
need.
was kind of like one of the questions that I had for you was kind of um, yeah, this idea of like personal conflict and lack of empathy, right? Like where I feel, yeah, that's almost plays it right perfectly into that same sentiment where, you know, it was his, you know, lack of empathy, uh, you know, towards her or what have you, may have was causing personal conflict for her, right? So, um, do you see that play itself into a lot of personal conflict where it's just a lack of empathy, or?
Yeah, I absolutely, I totally agree. And, you know, what's interesting about conflict is that probably about, sorry, probably about 85% of conflict, if not more, is based on misunderstanding. If people really were able to listen to each other and understand why a person is taking a particular stand on any given issue, whether it's a serious thing or a light thing, if they really understood what that position was and why, they might not agree with it, but they would understand where the other person was coming from, and they might even find points of agreement together, and that conflict would be resolved. It's very often a misunderstanding because people are really not so much not talking, but not listening to each other enough,
Okay.
and not asking the right questions, not jumping to conclusions rather than saying, well, how come you feel that way, or why do you want this instead of that, or whatever.
Okay. Which all could lead back to your own programming, right? Where you know, you probably have a set of expectations, or the things that you know, in your course of life, you know, that you've come to expect from people, and they may, you know, if they somehow don't meet those expectations, then that'll create some frustration for you, and in conflict within that relationship.
Absolutely. And I can give you, excuse me, a really good example of something that came up not only at Con Ed, but I'm connected with other EAPs as well, and that comes up on a regular basis. Someone might come in and say, my boss is really critical of me. And I will ask them, well, my boss is putting me down all the time or whatever. And I will ask them, well, tell me what your boss is saying, and let me know the situation, and they'll explain the situation to me. And I'll say, now, what precisely did your boss say? And it will turn out that the boss might say something like, you're doing great in these two areas, but in this third area, I need to see some improvement or whatever, which is a perfectly okay thing to say, and
Sure.
certainly not coming down hard or being hypercritical or anything like that. And what will come out again is that that person, excuse me, that employee might have grown up in a family where somebody was criticizing them harshly all the time. So
Sure.
that when they hear even the slightest, like, could you do better just in this area, it just feels like so big in their mind. It just feels like that same harsh criticism again. So it's really important, again, to reality test and to see that what is happening now is not the same as what happened in the past, to be
Okay.
able to differentiate. And that also helps to resolve a lot of conflict.
Okay. So that person may have been self-internalized, you know, some form of conflict that didn't really exist, right? So they thought the boss was being very critical of them.
Mhm.
Um, phenomenal. I think, you know, just perhaps speaking to someone like you would help kind of alleviate uh, those kind of conflicts almost easily, because you almost realize that, hey, it's on me, right? It's my programming that has gotten me to believe that he's being critical of me, or he or she was being critical of me.
Right, right.
So
And
that's
often if we have low self-esteem, probably everyone's noticed this with someone in their lives. If they know someone who has not great self-esteem, or maybe is at some kind of low point in their lives, you feel like you're walking on eggshells around them. You can't say anything, or they'll take it like in a very, significant way. So that's something else also, to be aware of, that what somebody else, for me to help make clients aware of, that they might be taking something differently from the way that it was meant, because they're thinking that negative way about themselves. So they're assuming that everybody else is thinking that negative way about them too.
so. Stephanie, talk to me a little bit about the different things that you do to help at companies. I know you do seminars and kind of some training, you know, on a management level. as well as with the employees. You maybe tell us a little bit about some of the things you've done in the past.
Sure. I've done and still do a whole array of seminars around all kinds of work-life balance issues. So stress management seminars, anger management, communication, working with difficult people, and then things that are like work adjacent that adversely affect work, like if you're coping with aging parents, for example, or you're dealing with a difficult teen or the difficult teen years or whatever, or you're having some other issues at home, or you're just having a difficult time, managing a work and life balance situation. So I've done workshops and seminars and continue to do workshops and seminars on all of those. And I do individual counseling with either employees or management on a whole variety of issues, anything really that's affecting their lives, that's interfering with their work in some way. And I also do management consulting and executive coaching to help managers understand how best to motivate their employees, not with threats, not with intimidation, but with understanding what the employees' needs are and what best motivates them, so that they can, so that everyone can get, the optimal, can work optimally and also be in a healthy and happy workplace, because we spend so much of our times at work, and it's really important, I think, for everyone to be happy and healthy in their work. There's no reason that it should be a slog or a dungeon or anything like that. So
So you've mentioned in the past the uh, the importance of almost like trying to improve the relationship between management and employees, because it can be ultra expensive for a company to lose an employee, the loss of productivity, and then having to rehire. That in essence, I don't remember the metric, but you've said it costs the company an exponential amount of money.
yeah, it costs actually much more than the salary of that individual, the annual salary of that individual employee, to replace that person, find somebody new, and train that person enough so that they get up to speed. Because who's ever training that person, was ever like involved with the job search, interviewing candidates and so on, is taking time away from productivity. Anyone who's training that new person is taking time away from productivity. Plus, they're not getting somebody who's fully up to a productive level. So it actually costs way more than that person's annual salary to let that person go, or to lose that person because that person's unhappy, and to hire somebody new. So it's cost effective to ensure that all of your employees are happy, because the happier they are, the more productive they're going to be, and the more money you're going to both make and save.
So does it make sense for a company who's having trouble with an employee to just to try to see if there's any underlying issues that they could help to get past with that employee, so that they can help improve the productivity, right? As opposed to letting that person go.
Right. The question is always, when an employee becomes less productive, the question is there something happening in this person's personal life that's causing this, or is there something going on in the workplace? So as far as the personal life is concerned, um, we don't want anyone at work to intrude on someone's
Mm-hmm.
personal life. But what they can do is say, look, if there are problems outside of work that are interfering, we would really like, you don't have to tell us, but we would really, like, for your sake, to go and talk to someone about it, to help resolve that for your sake, and because it's causing a productivity issue here at work we don't want to see that getting worse. You know, way ahead of any kind of warning or write-up or anything like that, the first thing I would do is take, as you said earlier, an empathetic approach and just say, is there anything we can do? We'll support you if you need to go and talk to somebody on the outside and get help that way, and we'll work with you on that. But if there's something going on in the workplace, please let us know. And then if management alone can resolve it, great. If they need to call in somebody like me to help figure things out, then that would be the next step.
That's phenomenal that now you have to walk a really fine line from what what I'm hearing you say is that you can't get too intrusive in trying to extract information from somebody on a personal level, but the mere fact that you just realize, hey, something's different. We care enough about you. We think you should speak to somebody. Because as opposed to the alternative, which you said was you let that employee go, and then ultimately now you're looking at loss of productivity for many people in the whole entire company.
Yes, yeah.
So that's phenomenal information, and I think it's something that perhaps a strategy that a lot of companies should employ, just so that they save themselves the heartache of having to rehire somebody where it could have been a simple fix.
Yeah, and I think it's important, just as I mentioned patterns before with individuals, there are patterns in workplaces as well. And if there's a pattern in a particular workplace of people leaving the company, or of people needing to be let go on a regular basis, then my guess is that there's a problem with the workplace culture. And that's something that would be needed. We would need to look into, like it's almost as though there's like some kind of a virus in the workplace that needs to be looked into, and that's why this keeps happening over and over again.
Sure.
If there's a lot of absenteeism or stuff like that, that can also be a sign that there's a problem with the workplace culture.
So that's something that maybe perhaps another chance for you to help a company where perhaps a high level manager is looking at I can't understand why in this department there's so much turnover.
Mm-hmm.
And then having you come in and kind of in a consultant basis might be a good opportunity for them to kind of hash out whether or not there's a pattern, right? And then if that pattern is kind of pervasive enough where they need to make some other changes.
Right, and why and why that's what that what that culture is that's getting in the way of people being able to hold on, to stay there, or to stay without taking a lot of sick time or whatever. And that's where the executive coaching really comes in, because culture is determined by the top, rather than by the bottom. Even if it's some employees at the bottom who are behaving badly, good behavior has to be enforced at the very top. It has to be understood in a company that everyone has to feel safe in their workplace, and everybody has to feel really cared about in their workplace, so that
look, safe. I think safe and that the employer cares are probably more important than the person's salary, right?
Studies have shown that people actually, if they were given a choice of a safe and caring work environment or a higher salary, they would take the safe and caring work environment.
Wow. So creating that culture where people, feel happy about coming to work probably starts with the bare minimum of being safe and being well supported.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, creating opportunities for growth. It perhaps speaks to the person's human needs, right? Like where they feel like they want to feel like they're progressing.
Mm-hmm.
So that probably all those things play into the overall culture, right, of an organization.
Yes.
That's wonderful that you can kind of go in there and kind of advise folks, hey, this is perhaps where the culture is perhaps faltering. But I'm thinking about kind of how a lot of folks right now are telecommuting right now, and they're doing a lot of Zoom meetings like this. They're doing, how do you or what are some good ideas for kind of making sure that the culture is still at a a good level when people are social distancing and they're not in a cubicle next door.
I'm sorry, repeat that.
Where folks are they're being, because of social distancing, where we're not in the cubicle next door. How do companies help kind of improve or keep their culture at a high level? When we're kind of afar right now.
That's a really good question, and I think there always has to be a structure. There always have to be certain rules and guidelines that everybody abides by, and people have to feel safe. If let's say, even in our Zoom culture these days, let's say there are there's one coworker who's sending another one um, uh, emails that are really not appropriate or that are too harsh or whatever. There have to be, or if there's a manager who's being harsh with employees or whatever, there has to be an establishment that even in our remote culture, we always have to treat each other with respect. And again, that comes from the very top. And it has to be understood that if somebody doesn't feel respected, they have a place that they can go where they can voice their, it'll be dealt with fairly and actually, so that nobody gets favoritism because they're the boss's best friend or the boss's nephew or whatever. That that there's really going to be a culture of respect even while we're working in remote environments.
Okay.
Does that answer the question? Or
I think it does, because it really speaks to them feeling safe, even though they're not specifically in the same environment, right? But during those work hours, they do have to feel like they're being supported by management. They're being that it's an open enough culture where they can, if something was wrong, they could at least voice it to someone and be heard, right?
yeah, yes, absolutely.
So be heard, and then also perhaps some action being taken.
Right. It would have to be
Wrong.
not just heard, but looked into and action taken if necessary. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This has been phenomenal. I mean, is there any other tips that you would kind of give to folks to help keep them mentally fit during this time?
Yeah, there are lots of things that we can do. Again, remember, we're responding to this time with a lot of stress, and stress always makes us think in terms of fight, flight, or freeze, and forget about all plan B, C, D, E, and so on. So the first thing we want to do always is to dismantle that initial stress response. And there are various things that we can do. And I always recommend, first and foremost, just practicing some deep breathing. You don't have to do meditation. You don't have to sit in a lotus position, but just be aware of making your breathing very slow and deep, because that you're telling our response to stress is a physiological response first and foremost. And so we want to tell our body it's safe to calm down. I think also exercise, and I know it's difficult these days, we can't go to gyms or anything, but any kind of exercise that you enjoy, it doesn't have to be rigorous, it doesn't have to be bodybuilding, anything that people enjoy where they're moving around helps tremendously. First of all, it promotes that wonderful deep breathing. It gets oxygen to our brain so we can think more clearly. And if you exercise enough, we know it can produce the feel-good hormones and endorphins. But there's something overall about exercise that really helps to suppress the stress response and also elevate the immune system, which we really need to do now because stress compromises the immune system. And what I think is really great, and of course I see it all over the place here, is people out walking. They're out in the sunshine and blue skies and good weather. They're getting good exercise. They're seeing other human faces, even if they're 6 feet or more apart. They're actually not just looking at screens, they're actually seeing human beings, which I think is extremely important to do. They're out in nature, they're with trees, they're hearing birds, which is wonderful to take our minds off of whatever stressors we're dealing with. So that's really important. And then once we've sort of gotten that stress level down low enough, then we can start thinking in terms of options. We can challenge negative thoughts like this will never end, or I'll never get out of here, or things are going to get worse, or whatever. We can challenge all those negative thoughts. And we can also visualize a time when things will be better, and just keep ourselves, keep our eyes on the prize, as it were. So there are all kinds of things that we can do. But the first thing we need to do is dismantle that initial stress response. And
Okay.
the breathing and walking, to me, is outdoors is really. But if you like to dance in your house, or
Sure.
do bodybuilding, whatever, or walk on your treadmill if you've got one, anything, any movement can make you automatically feel better.
Wonderful. So moving and exercise and ultimately that helps create some additional clarity, if you would, for that person, so that they can think a little bit more clearly about their situation.
Yes, and I would also reach out to anybody who is caring and empathetic. I wouldn't reach out to somebody who says, "Oh, get over it," or move on, or whatever, who's not sensitive to what you're going through. But
Mm-hmm.
if you know people who will, commiserate with you, and who will listen to you, and who will understand your point of view and everything, and then maybe even give you a little advice or good whatever. It's always really helpful to talking to people who really care about you and respect you.
Wonderful. So Stephanie, if they wanted to, someone wanted to reach out to you, how can they best get a hold of
They can either go to my website, which is, my email address is info@stephaniecarrow.com.
you?
My
Okay.
website is stephaniecarrow.com, and that's StephanieCarrow.com. Or they can reach me by phone. I'm at, do you want me to give my phone number
Yeah,
out?
that would be great.
Okay. It's 917-613-6687.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate you meeting with us today and kind of sharing some wonderful thoughts about folks, how they can best manage this situation that we're in right now, and make themselves get to the better version of themselves, right? So
Absolutely.
I appreciate your time, and we look forward to speaking with you soon.
Well, thank you for doing this. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Take care.